On the 15th of November 1967, the director of the CIA sent a finding to the President of the United States. The agency had been ordered to answer one question: who, in a foreign capital, was secretly running the American anti-war movement? After months of work, Richard Helms gave Lyndon Johnson the answer. There was no one. The CIA could find no evidence that the leaders of the peace movement were taking money or direction from any foreign government. The protests in the streets were exactly what they looked like. Americans objecting to a war. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was closer to the beginning, because the program that produced that answer did not stop when the answer came back inconvenient. It grew. Over the next 7 years, it would open mail, infiltrate meetings, and build files on thousands of American citizens, all in pursuit of a foreign conspiracy that its own director had already reported did not exist. The cover name was Operation Chaos, and almost everything we can say about it with confidence comes from 2 federal investigations that took the program apart in public on the record. Start with the rule it was built to break. The law that created the CIA in 1947 gave it foreign intelligence work and, in plain language, kept it out of internal security. No police powers, no domestic spying. That line was the whole point of the agency's existence, the wall between a foreign spy service and a secret police. Chaos is the story of that wall coming down from the inside, not with a dramatic order, but with a quiet, bureaucratic drift that everyone involved could explain to themselves as reasonable. It began in August of 1967, when Helms created a special operations group inside the Counterintelligence Division, the corner of the CIA run by the legendary and deeply suspicious James Angleton. The man placed in charge of the new group was an officer named Richard Ober. His assignment had a certain logic to it. The White House, first under Johnson and then far more aggressively under Nixon, simply could not accept that the unrest in American cities was homegrown. Surely Moscow was behind it. Surely Hanoi was funding it. Find the wire, they said. Find the foreign hand. So Ober's group went looking. And here is where the documented record gets specific, because the Rockefeller Commission laid it out in 1975. Chaos used CIA stations overseas to track American activists when they traveled abroad. It drew on a mail opening program that had been steaming open letters between the United States and the Soviet Union for years, reading the private correspondence of American citizens by the tens of thousands. It took in reporting from informants who had worked their way inside anti-war and radical organizations, and it fed all of it into a system. Chaos did not operate alone either. It sat at the center of a small constellation of domestic programs that the Commission's cataloged by name. There was the mail program. There was a project aimed at physically infiltrating anti-war and radical groups near agency facilities. There was another that worked with college administrators and campus police to identify student dissidents without ever planting an informant. Each one had its own justification. Stacked together, they describe an intelligence service that had built, piece by piece, a domestic surveillance capability it was never supposed to have. That system is the part that should give anyone pause. By the time Chaos was shut down, it had built files on roughly 7,200 American citizens. It had compiled a computer index of around 300,000 names and about 1,000 organizations. 300,000. That is not a list of suspects. That is a catalog of a political movement, its members, its sympathizers, and the people who simply stood near it. And the agency did not keep this to itself. The Church Committee, the Senate investigation that ran in parallel, counted the paperwork flowing from Chaos to the FBI. Roughly 5,000 intelligence reports, 4,400 memoranda, around 1,000 cable disseminations. A foreign intelligence service, barred by law from domestic policing, had become a feeder line into the Bureau's files on American dissent. Now hold all of that next to the finding from 1967. Helms had already told the president there was no foreign control. He told him again in 1969. Both the Rockefeller Commission and the Church Committee went back through the program's own product and reached the same verdict. After 7 years, after 300,000 names, Chaos never substantiated the thing it was created to prove. The conspiracy was not hiding in the files. It was never there. This is the pattern worth naming, because it is the actual lesson of the document. A program does not need to find what it is looking for in order to keep looking. It only needs a mission that cannot be disproven to the people who want it true. The White House wanted a foreign hand. The absence of one did not read inside the system as case closed. It read as we have not looked hard enough. And so the aperture kept widening. By the end, chaos was logging groups in the women's liberation movement, people with no conceivable link to Vietnam at all. The target had quietly changed from foreign agents to domestic dissent itself. There is one more piece of the machinery worth naming, because it shows how routine the abnormal had become. In May of 1973, a new director, James Schlesinger, rattled by Watergate, ordered every CIA employee to write down any past activity they thought might fall outside the agency's legal charter. The replies were collected into an internal file that would later become famous as the Family Jewels. Chaos and the programs around it are in there. The agency, asked to confess its own potential lawbreaking, produced a document thick enough that the surveillance of American citizens was only one chapter of it. It came apart the way these things usually do, not through an internal conscience, but through a reporter. On December 22, 1974, Seymour Hersh put a story on the front page of the New York Times under a headline about a huge CIA operation run against the anti-war movement inside the United States. He named the shape of it, a special unit reporting up toward the director, holding files on thousands of Americans. Hersh pointed directly at Angleton's counterintelligence staff and at the officer assembling the data. By the time the story ran, the program had already been wound down, but the public did not know it had ever existed. The reaction built the very record we're reading from. President Ford convened the Rockefeller Commission, which devoted an entire chapter to chaos. The Senate convened the Church Committee. Between them, they put the program's scope, its methods, and its empty central finding into permanent public documents. That is why we can talk about chaos in confirmed numbers instead of rumor. The proof of the abuse is the government's own investigation of itself. I want to be fair about the dissent, because the discipline of reading these files means including the voice that pushes back. One of the officers who worked inside chaos, Frank Rafalco, later wrote a book defending it. His argument is that the threat environment was real, that the group eventually pivoted toward genuine counterterrorism, and that the commissions were too harsh. It is a named, on-record minority view, and it belongs in the story. But it stands against the conclusions of two separate federal investigations, and it does not move the central fact. The foreign conspiracy that justified the whole enterprise was never found, because it was not there. So what is chaos, finally, once you strip away the cloak and dagger of it? It is a case study in what happens when a secret agency is handed a question its political masters have already decided the answer to. The honest finding arrived early, in 1967, in writing from the director himself. Everything after that, the 7,000 files, the 300,000 names, the pipeline to the FBI, was the cost of a government refusing to believe its own intelligence. The files are declassified now. You can read the chapter the Rockefeller Commission wrote and the Church Committee's accounting in the links below. They describe an operation that succeeded at only one thing. It proved, in exhaustive and well-documented detail, that the conspiracy it was hunting had never existed. The next file is already on the table.